Sure, my name is David or Dave Wallace. I reached the final rank of lieutenant in the United States Navy Reserve active duty. We had some other great adventures. A couple of us skied on the Bossack River. Lots of stuff. But that was pretty much it. And then when I came home, I came home in September 70, I think. I had 30 days leave, so I went to stay with my parents in Pittsburgh. And if you've ever tried to buy a sports car in Pittsburgh in the winter, and winter started in September back in those days, it's a challenge, but I finally found this TR4A independent rear suspension. Dark blue, tan leather seats, of course. This was to replace my TR3 that I had to sell in California when I went to Vietnam. Loved Triumphs, had 4 of them over my life. But so then was assigned to Washington, D.C. Well, after 2 weeks of the 30 days leave, I had pretty much had it with it's a little too much of a change. So I went to Washington, was in Beaupers, got a call one day on the phone, a very lovely young voice saying, my name is, and while I was parking this morning, I think I bumped your car. You what? How did you get my number? Well, I just called, the deal and said, here's the tag number, and, can you tell me who it is? And I said, oh boy, why don't I meet you at the parking lot about 11:30, and we'll take a look at the damage. So I went down, couldn't even find a bump on the car. Here's this really nice looking young woman. 11 months later, we got married. So then I thought I had become quite close with my boss. He said, you really, if you want to stay in the Navy, you need to get on a ship. And I said, yeah, I guess I do. And he said, okay, we're going to get you a good slot. And it's going to be with really a good CO. And he had heard of Captain Roy Hoffman even then. And Hoffman was pretty well known around the fleet as, possibly the toughest man alive at the time. And he got me orders to the USS Ley out of Norfolk as navigator. And so I went down and met a guy who I had heard of in Vietnam, but he'd already left when I got there. But his nickname, or his call sign, was Latch. Very appropriate. On the Leahy, he was known as Nails, being the only human being in the world that chews nails for breakfast. The joke was, if the U.S. Navy was ever down to one World War I destroyer that had 100 rounds of 5-inch ammo, and they needed the Suez Canal open, what would happen? They'd get Roy Hoffman to open it with the destroyer. And that was him. He just, toughest man I've known. But good and ruthlessly fair. DLG-16, destroyer leader. She was later reclassified as a cruiser, which was a joke, and then later decommissioned and target practice or something. No, she was sold for scrap. Leahy was a McNamara ship, which meant it was built cheap. Good design, basically, but like most of what Bobby Mack did, it really didn't have a lot of brains behind it. For instance, it had 2 screws, 1 rudder. Well, it's basically a big destroyer, 584 feet, I think. But it's a big destroyer, but you need it to be maneuverable. Well, with one rudder, you're not that maneuverable. You're mostly then depending on your engines to move this thing around. But good ship, she could hold a lot of fuel, more than most destroyers had to underway replenish every day. We could go 7 or 8 days in the Mediterranean before we had to. Now we did it every third day, you know, just so we were good at it. But what else? Things to remember. 2 things. First story, sea story. Now these aren't sea stories. Sea stories start with, this is no shit, guys. First sea story. I was, like I said, I was navigator, and I'm up on the bridge one morning, and captain walks out. Captain Hoffman always had this cigar. And I mean, even during general quarters, when you would lock the ship up and literally make that sucker airtight, he'd have that damn cigar. But he walks out on the bridge, and he says, "Navigator, can you find the Kithra anchorage?" And just by luck, the leading petty officer in the quartermaster gang had been showing it to me on the chart earlier that morning. Now, the Kithra anchorage in those days in the Med is where the Russians hung out. And it was not uncommon at all to see 5, maybe 10, maybe even 12 Russian warships anchored at the Kithra anchorage. And so I, "Yes, sir, right over here, you know. How long will it take to get there?" And I said, "Well, maybe an hour and a half." He says, "Good, make your course to Kithra anchorage." So, "Okay, yes, sir, you know, right away." And off through the deck, recommend course, umpty clutch. And so we start heading over to Kithra. The captain comes out on the bridge again and slows us down, and "Bosun mate." And this little bosun mate, not little bosun, this little bosun mate used to wipe out Marines on leave. I mean, he would go into a bar and purposely pick a fight with 4 Marines by himself. He was a character. He has him queue up Stars and Stripes Forever on the 1MC, which the 1MC is the ship's loudspeaker system. It's heard everywhere on the ship and can be heard for blocks and blocks in every direction. Captain then calls the Webb's officer, has him put, says, "I want missiles on the rail. I want the blue-tipped ones." Those are the ones we're not allowed to talk about, Captain. I didn't ask you, navigator. Here comes, we were a double-ender. So we had a missile launcher fore and aft, so 2 missiles forward, 2 missiles aft. Stars and Stripes Forever, as loud as he could get it. We go through the Kithra anchorage at about, close to 22 knots, 24 knots, something like that. He yells, "All the crew," you know, he thought of man the rail late, so we didn't really get the rail man. And here's these Russians, like, you know, what in the hell is this? And one of them, they were mostly turbines then, where we were steam. You can see 2 of their smaller destroyer types lighting off with these huge black clouds, emergency light off on the turbines and stuff. They were going to get the anchor up and come get us. Well, instead of just, you know, sort of lazily going through on a northeast course, the old man goes, "Yeah, shift your rudder." And we're going to back through. And I'm like, "Oh my Lord, be sure we get this all logged." You know, I'm not doing this. But we did that. That was just a great deal. And I mean, that was Captain Hoffman. I mean, he was aggressive. He didn't mind, you know, right in your face. The other thing that I will always remember was we had a joint operation with some of the I can't remember what they called it, Greek Navy basically, but it had some fancy name, and these were smaller boats, probably 100, 110 feet, patrol craft, PCs we might have called them, or PGs or something. And they were quite fast, quite maneuverable. And the goal was to see how well a U.S. destroyer type could defend against a sort of a swarming type of attack. Great idea. I mean, shoot, we've been riding around with an aircraft carrier, you know, for weeks. And so this sounded like fun, except we realized it was at night. And we realized it was in the Greek islands at night. You could probably imagine it, but here you've got this uber aggressive captain, has the deck and the con, which means he's in total control of the ship now. I mean, as if anybody had to ask that question. But, and we're chasing these patrol craft around the Greek islands. And here's your navigator. When a Navy ship goes aground, captain gets crucified. Navy commander only gets tortured. I mean, our leading petty officer, really gruff guy, but he knew his stuff. Jeez, I can't recall his name right now, but wonderful guy. But he is personally plotting our course because the other guy goes, what do we do now? He's telling me, boss, I can't keep up. I can't keep up with this. This is crazy. And I'm looking at my little radar screen, and we are going into islands and backing out, and zoom over here, and finally he starts heading in, and he's right to the beach. It's like 20 knots. And I mean, this ain't no sports car. I mean, this is, you know, a big ass ship. And I finally screwed up the courage. I said, navigator recommends all back emergency, right full rudder, now. Yeah, no. I yelled at the quartermaster gang, which was my group then. I said, log that recommendation. Captain goes, all back full. I swear, the guys in combat were right behind us. I mean, a couple of bulkheads back. But they are, you know, they're using sonar at this point instead of a fathometer, because the fathometer is like straight down. The sonar can look ahead. And they're going, we have 20 feet straight ahead, you know, distance. It's changing too fast. We drew like 28 feet. And they were panicking. I mean, they started panicking before I did. But you could hear the CIC watch officer going, CIC recommends get out of here. CIC recommends stop. CIC recommends right full rudder, back emergency. And this is all coming over the squawk box. So everybody on the bridge could hear it. And guy at the helm is getting a little nervous. You know, I wonder if I get court-martialed if we stick this in the mud. But all in all, I mean, there were some miserable times, just like anything, but you know, there were good people. Not as good overall as the Swift Boat group. And I think that was strictly a function of, you know, what we were doing, where we were doing it. But I loved being in the Navy. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And do it again in a New York minute.